This is History Myths and Myth Conceptions, and today's myth conception is Elagabalus was the first transgender emperor. More and more people read the story of the Roman Emperor Elagabalus, although usually not the original sources about his reign, and raise the question about the transgender emperor and stuff like that. This is something that provokes attention these days, can be considered a hot topic or an important question. Totally fits the current political and social narrative in many countries of the world, and can, in one way or another, positively affect the, so to speak, social credit of a person. And it is not surprising that most of the discussions about the so-called transgender emperor are inherently flawed and just simply wrong. This is not really an issue. There is almost no substance for a meaningful dialogue, and raising the question like Elagabalus was the first transgender emperor, and this is the exact wording you can find online sometimes, it makes very little sense. Let's quickly analyze what is fundamentally wrong with this question. First, there is a problem with the depictions of Elagabalus, and we simply don't have enough reliable information on this particular emperor. There are three main sources about his reign, namely Cassius Dio, Herodian, and Historia Augusta. That's basically it. All of the three sources are extremely biased, and none of the ancient historians tries to hide the outright hatred for Elagabalus. And the main problem with Elagabalus was not his sexual practices. Tales of depravity and licentiousness is a common trope of the ancient historians when they already established that this is a bad person and just turn on the slandering mode. The main problem with Elagabalus was, as we can see in the original sources, his outrageous religious policies. Elagabalus, or his family, engaged in shameless, insensitive, and highly offensive reformation of the traditional Roman religion. Nobody liked it, and less than 4 years into his reign, Elagabalus was killed. So there are no trustworthy sources. A significant part of the stories about Elagabalus are not only greatly exaggerated, no, most of them are probably just fiction. This is the quality of the historical material we're dealing with. Or, to put things simply, it is like finding a completely unreliable book, a work of fiction, that says that Napoleon was in fact the Antichrist, the devil. And therefore he had horns, because devils have horns. And he also had hoofs, and a tail. And then somebody pops up and tries to start a conversation on whether Napoleon should be considered the first ruler, who was in fact a minotaur, a half man, half bull, because stories about the Antichrist are clearly religious fiction and exaggeration. But we must read between the lines. And minotaurs actually existed in the ancient world. They lived in the labyrinths and, well, this is just stupid. And this is exactly the situation we have with Elagabalus. Elagabalus, by the way, wasn't even his name. It was the name of the god this guy was promoting and quite probably tried to make the chief god of the Roman religion. He reigned as Emperor Antoninus, and his real birth name was, well, we don't know. At least, not for sure. So, since Elagabalus was absolutely hated by the historians, they followed the tradition of character assassinations. And this is how we get all these mandatory stories about his licentiousness. Since Elagabalus was considered not only a bad emperor, but an extremely bad emperor, the traditional arsenal of the stories about debauchery, obscene sexual habits, and incest, and marrying a Vestal virgin is considered an incest. Well, it apparently wasn't enough. The religion of Elagabalus, a Phoenician/Arab from Syria, demanded circumcision, a practice that was seen as deeply weird by the Romans. It is not surprising that ancient authors made a quick link that, okay, since this guy is into the mutilation of private parts, then it is more or less logical that he wants to eventually cut off his penis. Apart from it, since the tradition always demanded, as mentioned, obscene sexual habits, this fictitious Elagabalus wasn't only participating in the orgies, married like 6 times in 3 years and stuff like that. He also had to be presented as a person who enjoys being a passive partner in homosexual relationships, like any bad emperor, like Gaius Caligula, like Nero, like Commodus. It's a tradition. But since Elagabalus was a teenager, he died when he was 17, it probably wasn't sufficiently odd. So here come the stories that he prostituted himself in the brothels and he liked to wear women's clothes. That kind of underlines his indecency. I understand that at this point some of you might say, wait, I'm lost here. What is he talking about? What does he mean with these strange phrases about being a passive partner and that it is not sufficiently odd because Elagabalus was a teenager? What's going on in his head? And this is another important problem we're dealing with, that just like the unreliability and total bias of the sources, destroys this transgender emperor narrative. Ancient Romans, and Greeks as well, had a different concept of human sexuality. We are, in a way, comparing apples and oranges here. You can't just mechanically transport a modern-day concept to antiquity and use it to measure things there. Romans never had this concept of what is transgender or what is gender identity as we understand it today. Just like their concepts of homosexuality and heterosexuality were very different as well, to a point when there was no strict dividing line. It was more or less just sexuality. But with certain aspects, including, yes, the question of who is penetrating who. It was important as pederasty was widespread and it implied certain things. So this is it. Unreliable sources, grotesque exaggerations, pure fiction, and then a different concept of human sexuality. There is nothing to discuss here, really. And the whole phrase, Elagabalus was the first transgender emperor, is basically invalid on many different levels.